Tonight, we're going to Plainfield, Wisconsin. Quiet roads, frozen winters, and a farmhouse that, well, changed American horror forever.
This is the story that inspired Psycho, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre, and Silence of the Lambs.
Right. But the truth is stranger and sadder than the movies. Hey everyone, I'm Jan.
And I'm Sandras.
And this is Echoes of Midnight.
Today we're covering the case of Ed Gein. It's a heavy one. We'll be discussing murders, grave robbery, and disturbing discoveries from his farmhouse. We won't be graphic,
No.
but consider this your content warning.
Please take care of yourself. Skip this one if you need to. And a quick note, we'll center victims and facts, avoid sensationalism, and push back on myths that pop culture spread. If you like deep dives that separate reality from rumor, hit follow, rate the show, and share it with a friend. Okay, Plainfield, Wisconsin, late 1950s. Let's set the scene.
Plainfield was tiny, a farming town. Everybody knows everybody. In towns like that, isolation can hide in plain sight.
Enter Edward Theodore Gein, born 1906, quiet, awkward kid. He and his brother grew up with a strict, domineering mother, Augusta, who preached that the world, especially women, were sinful. That control didn't just set the rules.
No.
It created a worldview.
Their father struggled with alcoholism and died in 1940. Then, in 1944, Ed's older brother Henry died in a suspicious brush fire. Authorities ruled it accidental.
Yeah. There's debate about that, but there's no conclusive proof of foul play. The turning point was Augusta's death in 1945. After she died, Ed's connection to the world just frayed.
Okay.
He closed off most of the house. The parts she used were preserved like a shrine, and he lived in this small, messy section by the kitchen. That isolation intensified his obsession with death, anatomy, and ultimately, graveyards.
Two women anchor this case in reality, beyond the myths: Mary Hogan and Bernice Worden.
Mary Hogan ran a tavern in nearby Pine Grove. She vanished in December 1954. No body. Locals whispered. Ed made these odd jokes about Mary, things like, "She's not missing, she's at my house," which people just chalked up to his awkward humor. In hindsight, not jokes.
Then, on November 16th, 1957, Plainfield's hardware store owner, Bernice Worden, disappeared.
Yeah.
It was the first day of deer season. Quiet streets, lots of folks in the woods. Her son, Frank Worden, who was also the deputy sheriff, he found blood in the store and the cash register missing.
There was a paper trail. The last receipt was for antifreeze. Name on the slip, Ed Gein. Deputies headed to his farm that night, and what they found would shock not just Plainfield, but the entire country.
Let's slow down and be respectful here. The police discovered Bernice Worden's remains on the property. Inside the house and outbuildings, they also found evidence tying Gein to the disappearance of Mary Hogan.
And then there were the items that turned Gein from a small-town suspect into a national nightmare. These homemade objects and keepsakes made from human remains.
Yeah.
We won't describe them in detail, but the point is, it wasn't just murder. It was grave robbery on a truly disturbing scale.
Gein later admitted to exhuming graves from local cemeteries.
Wow.
Typically recently buried women who, in his mind, resembled his mother. He said he went into a kind of trance on these nights and would come home and, quote, wake up to what he had done.
Important distinction here. The popular image of a chainsaw-wielding killer is complete fiction. Gein used a firearm to kill Bernice Worden, and he confessed to killing Mary Hogan as well. The rest, most of the remains found, came from graves he robbed. Not from additional murder victims. The house itself, by the way, became infamous. It was later burned down mysteriously before it could become a spectacle. A lot of people in town did not want it turning into a dark tourist site. So what was going on psychologically? Gein was evaluated and ultimately found not guilty by reason of insanity. Diagnoses included severe mental illness with psychotic features. He was obsessed with his mother and had a deeply distorted understanding of identity, death, and gender.
Two clarifiers here. First, clinicians said Gein wanted to become his mother. He reportedly fashioned a woman's suit to step into that identity.
Right.
That is not the same as being transgender. It is really important to not conflate gender identity with a violent, psychotic fixation, which is rooted in grief, abuse, and delusion.
Second, you'll hear the necrophilia question a lot.
Yeah.
Gein denied it. Examiners suggested he might have been incapable of sexual function. But even without that component, the behavior, the exhumation, keeping body parts, that reflected profound pathology.
There's also the isolation factor. After Augusta died, there was no one to challenge his delusions or supervise his spiraling behavior. Combined extreme grief, rigid moral teachings, and mental illness with access to cemeteries and a secluded farmhouse, you get a perfect storm.
We can also talk about fantasy rehearsal, the way he read anatomy books and so-called shutter pulps, these lurid crime magazines of the era. It didn't cause his crimes, but it gave shape to his fantasies.
Let's circle back to the investigation. The antifreeze receipt tied Gein to Bernice Worden on the day she vanished. Deputies went to the farm, saw suspicious signs, and entered. They arrested Gein later that night, and he confessed to killing Bernice and to the 1954 murder of Mary Hogan.
Forensics and statements connected items in the farmhouse to both women. As the scope of the grave robberies emerged, investigators had to work with local cemeteries and families, which is one reason this case traumatized the region. People needed to know if their loved ones had been disturbed.
Legally, Gein was first found incompetent to Tri-Stale and committed to a state hospital. In 1968, a judge found him guilty of the murder of Bernice, but not guilty by reason of insanity. He remained in psychiatric institutions for the rest of his life, dying in 1984.
He was suspected in Mary Hogan's murder as well, based on his confession and physical evidence. But that case wasn't brought to trial, given the insanity finding and the costs involved. I mean, again, this was mid-century Wisconsin. Resources were limited.
After his arrest, there was an auction of his belongings, including his car. The house burned. The town's priority was moving on rather than becoming a sideshow.
True crime often names the perpetrator, not the people harmed. Let's do better. Mary Hogan was 54. She ran a tavern, known for her big laugh and a sharp sense of humor. She'd moved from Chicago looking for a quieter life.
Bernice Worden was 58, a mother, a business owner, active in her community. The way the case unfolded, her son finding the store, the receipt, it adds such a personal layer of pain. These were real people with full lives, not just names in a file.
And the families who learned graves had been disturbed, I mean, imagine that shock. It's hard to convey the community grief that just lingered for years.
Okay, myth-busting time. 3 major horror characters draw from the Gein case. Psycho's Norman Bates, the domineering mother, the shrine-like home, identity confusion. The Texas Chain Saw Massacre's Leatherface, masks and household items tied to human remains, and Silence of the Lambs' Buffalo Bill, the woman suit concept.
But none of those characters are literal portrayals of Gein. They're composites. Psycho is probably the most psychologically aligned, the mother fixation. But it leaves out the whole grave robbery dimension. Texas Chainsaw adds the cannibal family and power tools. That's pure invention. And Silence of the Lambs mixes elements from multiple killers.
Pop culture also compresses timelines and dramatizes details. The real horror of the Gein case was banal and claustrophobic. A solitary man, a neglected farmhouse, and a community that just thought he was odd but harmless.
There's a lesson here about myth-making. The more we turn these crimes into campfire stories, the more it's easy to lose sight of the actual victims and the very human factors, mental health, isolation, grief, that were in play.
It's fair to ask, were there warning signs? People knew Ed was odd. He did chores, he babysat, did handyman work. He'd say unsettling things, but in small towns, you sometimes just chalk that up to eccentricity.
The 1950s also weren't great at connecting dots around mental health.
No, they weren't.
And there weren't robust services. And even if there had been, Ed lived alone and voluntarily. Until a violent crime happens, the system usually can't intervene.
There's also grief and the aftermath of a controlling parent. When someone's entire identity is built around pleasing or obeying a parent, their death can be destabilizing in dangerous ways if there's an underlying illness.
Prevention, in modern terms, might look like better community mental health access, training to recognize risk factors, and quicker follow-up on missing persons cases with forensic tools we now take for granted. In 1957, that toolkit just didn't exist. We mentioned the house burning. It went up in March 1958 before it could be sold. The cause was never conclusively proven, but many locals saw it as the town's way of saying, "Not here, not this."
Items from the property, like Gein's car, were auctioned. People came from out of town to see the spectacle, and that angered a lot of residents. The community wanted privacy, not a circus.
Gein spent decades in psychiatric care. Staff often described him as a quiet, even helpful patient.
Wow.
It's another reminder that monstrous acts can be committed by people who, outside those acts, can seem ordinary. That dissonance is part of why the case sticks with us.
So how do we cover a case like this without glorifying it? For us, it's center the victims,
Right.
skip graphic blow-by-blow details, debunk myths that sensationalize, and place crimes in context, mental health, community, era.
And don't conflate Gein's pathology with marginalized groups.
Please.
His identity confusion and this becoming mother fantasy is not a stand-in for transness or any gender identity. It's a specific delusional fixation.
Also, don't let the movie versions eclipse the truth. The reality is disturbing enough without creative embellishment.
Final takeaways: Ed Gein was not a mastermind. He was a profoundly ill, isolated man whose crimes devastated families and reshaped American horror.
The case reminds us how grief, control, and untreated mental illness can twist into something unrecognizable.
Yeah.
And it asks us to tell these stories carefully, without turning real suffering into entertainment.
If this episode was meaningful to you, please rate the show, leave a review, and share it. It really helps us reach more listeners who care about nuance.
We'll list our sources and recommended reading in the show notes, including reporting from the time and later court documents. Take care of yourselves and each other.
I'm Jan.
And I'm Sandra.
Thanks for listening.